So, good morning, everybody. Today we will study another branch of paleontology that deals with the plant groups or planting kingdom, that is the study of plants, and more precisely, it is the study of ancient plants, which is called Palaeobotany. Now, just a minute. তোরা কি শুনতে পেলি এই পার্টটা?
হ্যাঁ স্যার হ্যাঁ স্যার
আনসার পেয়েছি।
আমি রেকর্ডিংটাই শুরু করতেই ভুলে গেছি। দাঁড়া, আমি আরেকবার এই পার্টটা বলছি, হ্যাঁ? Good morning, everybody. So today we'll start another branch of paleontology that deals with the plant kingdom, uh, and particularly in this topic, we came into study the morphology of plants and how will they change through time with different earth conditions. That we will going to learn through this topic. So this topic deals particularly with the plants, and that is why um, it is known as botany, and as it deals with the ancient plants, because being a paleontologist we are mostly dealing with the fossil plants. So that is why we are going to learn about paleobotany. Now, if we look at the meaning of the term paleobotany, it's derived from two Greek words. One is paleon, which means old, and the other is botany, which means study of plants. Now, we use the term plant or we heard the term plant, the first thing came into our mind is the uh, surrounding plant bodies, what we observe around ourselves. So that means the plants in the terrestrial condition. Now, plants mostly found in the land portions, and we know that the land areas, they rest or they occur above the base level of erosion. So in most cases the organic bodies live in the terrestrial condition, that is live in above the base level of erosion. They are not easily preserved. The marine organ, whenever you try to study a marine environment, there are lots of living beings are already there, and those living beings consists of many kinds of animals, both including microscopic and macroscopic, as well as some plants. So in marine condition we will get already a huge representative of ancient animal bodies in terms of their hard parts, in terms of their shells. Although there are also plant materials are present, but as we get more and more amount of animal remains in the marine condition, so from that we can get an idea of the paleoclimatic condition of that place. But when it comes to the terrestrial condition, it comes above the base level of erosion. Because mostly erosion occurs there, so the chance of preservation, chance of fossilization is very negligible in terrestrial condition. So whatever minimum information we get in terms of microscopic animals, in terms of macroscopic animals, or even in terms of plants, that will be very important to us to get an idea about the ancient condition of that place. So that is why the study of plants, particularly for the terrestrial condition, is very, very important for a paleontologist. Now, whenever a paleontologist or specifically a paleontologist when deals with the plant remains, he or she is called a paleobotanist. So, whenever a paleobotanist uh, goes for the study of ancient plants, not only he or she identify the plant remains of the ancient geological time or its reconstruction, but they will go for the study of the morphological descriptions, morphological identifications, as well as their interactions with the surrounding environment. So, paleobotany in this way, particularly for the terrestrial conditions, gives us huge informations about the ancient world. Now, a plant fossil may be preserved a complete plant body or part of a plant. Say, for example, the flower of a plant, the fruit of a plant, they can be preserved separately after its death. Because in most cases, what we found that after the death of the plant, the portions or the different parts of the plant, they are disseminated. They are going disseminated from the original plant material and occurs individually. So in most cases, we get uh, individual entities, individual parts of plants segregated or differentiated from each other. In very rare instances, we get a completely preserved plant fossils. Now, before we going to study the plant fossils, the first thing we have to know that whom we called plants, what plants are. There are three characters on the basis of which we called a living being a plant body, planty. The first is the living being must be autotrophic. That means it should be able, it should create or it should produce or make its own food with the help of photosynthesis. That means the organism can do photosynthesis with the help of some abiotic materials collected from the nature. Now, from our previous knowledge of biology, we know that mostly the plants are the photosynthetic group of organisms, but there are some animals who can also do photosynthesis. So this point solely not indicate or not satisfied to indicate the planty kingdom. So the second point is that those organisms which have proper nucleated shells, that means they are eukaryotic, and not only they have proper nucleated cells, but these organisms also are multicellular. That means they contains more than one cells. So if a organic body, if a living being satisfies all these characters, that is they are autotrophic, they are eukaryotic with proper nucleated cells and multicellular, then we call them as plant. Now, study of plant fossils remain incomplete in many cases. As I already told you, that except some specific parts which seems to be hard, which seems to be rigid, so that they can sustain the fossilization process, like the stems, in some cases the roots or the seeds, which have a hard protection cover so that they can be preserved during the fossilization process. Most of the parts are of soft material, so they have very less chance of being preserved. And not only that, there are some plant groups like the fungi, the mosses. These are entirely made up of soft material. So all the stem part, the roots, the leaves, all are made up of soft parts. So it is most likely, until or unless they are not preserved in an unusual way, in most likely cases, these groups will not be preserved in the fossilization process. So with different taphonomic conditions, with different uh, processes in the fossilization process, they are completely lost in the fossil record. And secondly, plants after their death, they becomes disintegrated. That also I told you that most of the plants, as we see in our surroundings, that during the springtime, just after the winter, we found that many plants shreds their leaves. Now, being a present day human being, we are aware of the fact, and we can distinguish different plant bodies with their characteristics, flowers, fruits, and leaf pattern, the looks appearance of the leaves. So when they are disintegrated from the uh, original plant body and we collect them separately, by observing those individuals separately, we can also distinguish different plant bodies. So if we found a mango tree in side by side with a tree of banana, we are able to see in the living conditions with all its parts intact. That is a mango tree consisting of its stem, roots, its fruit, and flowers. At the same time, a banana tree that also we can see with its leaves, with its stem, with its fruits. So we already aware that how these two trees look like and what are their components, different parts they also look like. So even after their death, when they are disintegrated, when they are separated out different parts of the plant bodies into different components, say for example the mango trees are disintegrated, their leaves are separated, fruits are separated, flowers are separated, and at the same time the banana trees, their its leaves, its fruits, stem are separated, and they are, when they are mixed with one another, as we are aware of the fact that how these two tree looks like, we can easily segregate them into two groups, and we can say, okay, this leaf is of a mango tree, this fruit is of a mango tree, and thereby we can group them. But in the ancient time, this process we cannot see. So what we get is the ultimate result, that is the disintegrated or broken parts of an ancient plant, and we don't know that which part is of which tree in original. So reconstruction of the whole plant is often very difficult, and that is why each parts of the plant body is identified separately and they are named as different genera and different species. So taxonomic oversplitting will also be there because of the unawareness or because of our restriction whenever we try to study a ancient plant, because we don't know which part, which flower or which fruit or which leaf belongs to which original plant. Even a fruit or a seed or a leaf is found side by side, then also we can't club them in a single genera or single species, because in after their death, due to different taphonomic processes, they can be gathered together from different areas. So it is possible that these three, the flower, the seed, and the leaves, are of different plants. So that is why uh, the taxonomic part, or the taxonomic identification, taxonomic reconstruction of the plant material in ancient time is become a problematic matter for a paleontologist. So that is why we have to go for different genera and different species name for individual parts of a plant. So these two are the main difficulties which a paleobotanist uh, uh, encounter during its study of ancient plants, and that is why the plant fossil study in many cases becomes incomplete. Now, although the study of ancient plants is vastly not complete and there are many restrictions, but the study of plants have also some positive sides. We get many informations from the study of plants also. Now, first thing, as I already told, terrestrial organisms are very rare. So in these situations, whatever minimum informations we get from any uh, kinds of fossils, that will be important to us. So if a single plant material preserved in the terrestrial condition, and that we can identify in the fossil record, that will be important to identify the environment, to identify the climatic condition of that area in the past time. Now, what are the indicators, or what are the uh, environment signatures we get from the plant bodies? For that, different morphologies of plants are helpful to get an idea about the ancient climatic conditions. In present day nature, we can see that many of the plant leaves, they are of this kind. Some are these kinds of tooth margin or jagged margin, and some are smooth margins like this one. So if we try to distinguish the leaf margin, we can distinguish them into two groups. One is smooth margin leaves, one is jagged margin or tooth margin leaves. Now, the percentage of these leaf margins, if we look at with respect to temperature, we can see that decrease in the mean annual temperature in a region will be reflected by the increase in the tooth margin leaves in that region. So in the cold areas, in the cold climatic condition, we get more and more jagged margin leaves compared to smooth margin leaves. So it not indicate that in cold climate we did not get any smooth margin leaves. What I say that the percentage of jagged margin leaves will be more in cold climatic condition, as you can see in this binary graph also. That is a experimental condition which is found by the workers, and this is published in 1978 in a paper of American Science. And there people find that when they plot the percentage of smooth margin species with respect to average annual temperature, they found that in the cooler condition, in the cold climatic condition, the percentage of jagged margin species is higher, whereas at higher temperature condition, the percentage of smooth margin species is higher. So that is why if we look at the present day conditions, we whenever we go to the hilltops, or whenever we get to the high altitude areas where the climatic condition is relatively cold, temperature is relatively low, we get more and more this type of jagged margin leaves, more and more pine trees. Whereas whenever we came to the flatlands where the uh, mean annual temperature is relatively high, we get more and more smooth margin leaves. So in that way, the leaf margin analysis, or it is abbreviated as LMA, that will give you, simply by counting the number of smooth margin species and number of jagged margin species, we can do a ratio between these two, and from that we can get an idea, depending on their relative abundance, about the mean annual temperature condition of that area. Similarly, there was another analysis that is called leaf area analysis, or abbreviated as LAA, which shows that increase in the average surface area of the leaf of a region reflect increase in the mean annual precipitation. So that is why in the tropical uh, regions where precipitation or where rainfall is very high, we get more and more large size leaves of plants. Whereas in cooler areas, uh, the foothills or in the high altitude areas where there is less amount of precipitation, we get the uh, plant leaves which have less surface area, because the leaves are there are some pores from which transpiration, and by transpiration the loss of uh, water occurs, and due to that the plant uh, body may suffer desiccation. So whenever in an area there is ample amount of or sufficient amount of precipitation, the tree can receive, or different parts, particularly the leaf, they will receive sufficient amount of uh, nutrient rich water from the roots and the transporting systems of plants. So there will be no problem of loss of water through transpiration from the leaves. So that is why they have a large surface area of the leaves. But in higher altitude areas where the precipitation is low, so there is less supply of water, and trees get low amount of uh, nutrient rich water from the subsurface conditions from the soils. So now in that condition, if a plant in these low supply of water condition have large surface area, so there will be higher amount of loss of water through evapotranspiration. So soon the plant suffer desiccation, and it will suffer death. So that is why the plants in the higher altitude areas, or where there is a restriction in the supply of water, the plants make their leaves having low average surface area. So again, by observing the leaf area, but the leaf surface area, we can also get an idea about the uh, amount of precipitation occur in that area. Another morphological character identify the ancient climatic condition, that is the presence of stomata and their density. Now, stomata are the pores present in the leaves from which any kinds of gaseous exchange with the atmosphere occurs. So plant leaves takes atmospheric carbon dioxide through the stomata, and also the uh, transpiration of water and oxygen in the atmosphere, that will also done through this pores, through this stomata. Now, this density of stomata is inversely proportional to the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. That means whenever the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration becomes higher, that means a plant leaf is mostly surrounded by carbon dioxide gases, and it can get easily the sufficient amount of carbon dioxide which is required for photosynthesis. So when the atmospheric carbon dioxide is higher in concentration, number of stomata, that means number of pores in the plant leaves, that will decrease. Similarly, in the opposite case, when there is less amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the stomatal density or the number of stomata in the plant leaves will increase, because they will have to take a lot of atmospheric gases to get the sufficient amount of carbon dioxide through the numerous stomata or through the numerous pores present in the plant leaves. Now, we know that this carbon dioxide is a important greenhouse gas. That means the carbon dioxide is responsible, or one of the responsible uh, agent which cause or which put some significant contribution to global warming. So when carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere increased, we found that global temperature is rising, or global temperature is higher, such that the present day scenario, we are very much concerned about the global temperature increase, global warming, and often we heard that the polar glaciers are melt, polar glacier decreases in their size, and the reason may be the increased amount of extraction or increased amount of supply of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere through the factories or different man-made causes. So the present day carbon dioxide level is gradually high, which contributed to the global warming effect in a significant way. Now, what we learned in this process from the stomatal density, that whenever carbon dioxide level in the ancient condition, in the ancient climate is high, that means at that time global warming was occurring, and that can be identified by the lesser number of stomata, by low stomatal density in the plant leaves. Oppositely, when there was global cooling, that means there was less amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is identified from the higher number of stomata in the plant leaves. That means high stomatal density. Now, researchers, they study that stomatal density decrease during the past 200 years. So this is the time of industrial revolution. Much and much industries came. So by this, much and much amount or more and more amount of carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere. So plants get uh, sufficient amount of carbon dioxide surrounding their leaves, so they gradually decreasing the stomatal density. And peoples, when find these kinds of relations in the present day plants, they try to look at the ancient plant leaves in terms of stomatal density. And interestingly, they found that during the time of uh, particularly Triassic Jurassic boundary, here you can see the graph during the time of Triassic Jurassic boundary. Here you can see the in the x-axis the geological periods are plotted. So this is the Jurassic and this is the Triassic periods, and this is the junction portion between the Triassic and Jurassic period. So you can see in this portion there is a drop in stomatal density, and we know that Triassic Jurassic boundary is one of the big five mass extinction boundary which are evidenced. So these kinds of mass extinction in the Triassic Jurassic boundary may be a result of global warming, which is evidenced from the lowering of stomatal density during that time. Now, apart from Triassic Jurassic boundary, there are others ups and downs also there, but it is mostly found that at least the Triassic Jurassic boundary mass extinction and the KT boundary mass extinction, their scientists found a drop in stomatal density. This is much enlarged picture is the above one, where you can see a sharp drop in this time span in the Triassic Jurassic boundary in terms of stomatal density. So it is much lesser compared to other values of the previous and next few millions of years stomatal density values. So it is easily inferred from this stomatal density counts during this time interval that during this time a sudden drop in stomatal density occurs, and which is an indication of sudden increase of global temperature. But the preservation of stomata is a rare phenomenon. People does not get stomata easily or identify easily stomata in the ancient plant remains. So it is the process which is very difficult to identify the stomata in the ancient plant remains. So that is why people are only able to uh, identify the stomatal density, and from that they can able to consider the paleoclimatic conditions up to the Triassic Jurassic boundary. But before Triassic time, we know that the most severe among all the mass extinction, we often call limits the mother of all mass extinction, that is the Permo-Triassic boundary. Although there are also many plant remains are found, but identification of stomatal density in the Permo-Triassic boundary is still yet impossible, and from that people are not uh, establish the stomatal density with respect to the change in climatic condition in the Permo-Triassic time. Although in recent times some stomatal records from the Permo-Triassic times are coming out, so hopefully in near future scientists will scientists are able to identify the stomata during that time interval, and from that the climatic condition during the Permo-Triassic time, which is already established from the isotopic scenario, isotopic studies, that in the Permo-Triassic time a global warming was occurring in that time. that can be correlated with the plant signatures in terms of stomatal density. Now, another important morphology in the plant bodies, that is the growth rings. Now, these growth rings are growing with seasonal climatic changes, and it is particularly well observed in the mid-latitude climatic condition where there is seasonal variation of rainfall. So particularly in the low latitude monsoonal climatic condition, these growth rings are well observed. But areas where there is no seasonal variation, no temperature variation, no monsoonal precipitational variation, in those areas, these growth rings are not well observed. So in polar regions, if we look at the trees, these growth rings are not well developed in those plants. But in mid-latitudes, monsoonal climates, the plants occur in those plants. These they can produce a discrete annual growth rings. Now, if we look at the growth rings, we found there are some lighter and dark color bands alternately occurring, and these bands are occur periodically with the changing temperature condition with season. So they are wider during the growing season and narrower during the dormant period. The development of these rings is also dependent on many environmental factors, among which the important is temperature and precipitation. So when temperature is favorable, there is ample amount of precipitation, ample amount of rain, uh, it will develop a wider ring, and in the drier season, in the dormant period, it will produce a dark colored narrow ring. So one light colored ring and one dark colored ring together indicate a annual ring or annual band, annual growth ring of the tree. So light colored band indicates the rainy season, whereas dark colored band indicated dry season. So together these form a couplet, which indicates an annual growth ring. But from this annual growth ring, you can see that there are variation in thickness, and that is reflected with the changing temperature and precipitation condition through years after years. Even sometimes we get these kinds of scar marks in the plant bodies, particularly in the stems between the growth rings. And these scar marks or these burn marks can indicate about the past natural event of any kind of forest fire. So if the plant body is able to survive from that fire, and it will grow further in the latter times, then they will have these kinds of scars or these kinds of burn marks in their stem, and that can be reflected in the growth rings also. So with this kind of scars, or even with the identification, particularly in the variation of thickness, in the variation of width of the growth rings, we can also get an idea about the ancient temperature, precipitation, or seasonal variation during that time when the plants live. Now, apart from the climatologies, there are other aspects, other positive sides uh, scientists will also came to face when they are going to study the ancient plants. Firstly, it was observed that the evolution of plants and animals are going side by side. That means they are mutually related. So one the evolution of one group forces, or it will impact the evolution of other groups. And there are many examples of this, such as the when the Silurian uh, and the early Devonitian time, when the first land plants appeared in the Earth scenario. Soon after this, uh, it is also found the appearance of land animals. So first, we know that the origin of life occurred in an aquatic condition, particularly in a marine condition near a hot source, and life gradually evolved in the aquatic condition. So from this aquatic condition, first plants make a move in the land condition during the Silurian or early Devonitian times. And soon after that, animals will also move to the newly habitable place, that is the land areas in this time. Similarly, the large gymnosperms, that is the large size trees, appeared during the Carboniferous Permian time. Soon after that, the large size reptiles also appeared in the Mesozoic. We are very much famous about the herbivorous dinosaurs in the Mesozoic. Uh, so these are one evolutionary change of plants, which is also reflected in the change of evolutionary process of animal bodies. Appearance of angiosperms, that is the flowering plants, was followed by the appearance of birds and mammals. So you can see in almost every steps of the evolution of plants that will make an effect in the evolutionary chains of the animal bodies also. Not only that, the plant bodies, as I already told you, that they are useful contributors for particularly the terrestrial conditions, because the record of animal fossils from the terrestrial conditions is poor. So minimum information, whatever we get from any kinds of fossils, is very much useful to us. So plant fossils, particularly for the terrestrial conditions, whenever we get them, they are used in local correlation of rock sequences, and at sometimes, although it is less common, they are also used in intercontinental correlations. But because they have some geographic restrictions, and they are mostly controlled by local environments and climates, so in most cases, internal continental correlations are limited, but local correlation can be done easily with the help of plant remains. But there are certain geological time intervals when intercontinental correlations are also done. Say, for the example, during the Gondwana times, when all these continental landmass are together, the Australia, Antarctica, India, Africa, and South America. So these five major continental landmasses are together, we and occur in near the uh, 60-degree latitude of southern hemisphere. We call them supercontinent as Gondwana land, and we found that in all these land masses, all the plant evidences, all the plant remains of this time are found. Plants like Glossopteris, Gangamopteris, uh, and not only that, the that will also evidence from the animal fossils also, aquatic animal bodies also. Many reptiles, such as the freshwater reptile Mesosaurs, uh, the Cygnethas. So, with the help of these plant fossils, simultaneously side by side with these plant animal remains, we can say that as these plant remains are found in all these uh, continental land masses of this time, of this Permian Triassic time, we can say that these land masses are staying together or very much close to each other during that time interval, because the uh, distribution of fossil plant bodies, they are very much environmental restricted. Particular types of plants will be flourished in a particular environment, particular climatic conditions, and the distributions of their reproductive processes, reproductive organs, is very much dependent on the environmental condition, and they cannot be dispersed for a large aerial extent. So they are narrowly restricted within a narrow geographic range by natural conditions. So as we get same kinds of plant materials, same kinds of plant fossils in all these five major continental land masses, which are geographically isolated from by vast seas in the present time, but in the Permo-Triassic time, we can say from the similar kinds of plant fossils that these five continental land masses are staying together, or they are very much close enough to each other, and similar kind of environmental conditions, similar kind of climatic conditions are occurring at that time in all these five continental land masses. So we came to know many of the restrictions of studying ancient plants and many of the positive sides of ancient plants or plant fossils, that is the Palaeobotany. Now, as we came to know that firstly, to study a plant fossil, we have to know the different morphological part or different morphology, particularly the external features and their arrangement, as well as relationship with the entire plant body, that we have to know. So if we try to look at an entire plant, we can sharply separate it out into two parts. One part which is above the surface substrate, that we call as shoot systems, and this shoot system contains the stem, the leaves, the flower, fruits, and the other part which occurs below the surface in the soil portions, that we called as the root systems. So two parts, one is the subsurface part, that is the root system, and one part which is above the ground surface, that is the shoot system. Now plants have four basic organs: the underground portion, that is the root, and in the shoot system, the stem, leaves, and fructification. Fructification includes the reproductive organs, that is the fruits and seeds. Now coming to the first organ of a plant, that is the root. So root is a underground organ that is mainly non-green and descending portion of the plant axis. That means it grows underground, it grows in the subsurface condition. If we try to look at the characteristics of root, they are the descending portions, always grow in the underground in most cases. These are mostly non-green, that means they did not have the chlorophylls by which plants generally make uh, their food by photosynthesis, and they are usually colorless to brown colored. The roots have root cap which protects them for uh, during penetrating in the subsurface conditions. They have also root pockets and some unicellular root hairs. These are the organs, these root hairs, by which the roots intake the nutrients and the water from the subsurface conditions. Roots are always negatively phototrophic, that means they grow in the opposite direction of the source of light. Roots are positively geotropic, that means they grow towards the gravitational force direction, and they are positively hydrotropic also. That means they are again going towards the source of the water. So these are the characteristics of a root. Apart from that, that means the roots, these are the main functions. That means uh, the functions of roots are is mainly the absorbing water and nutrient from the soil, and make the plant stable by anchoring to the subsurface materials. The roots have also some secondary functions. So these two are the primary functions, but apart from this, there are some secondary functions also. The roots become sometimes fleshy or swollen for the storage of food. So plants often store their excess food materials in the root areas. Say for example, the carrots, radish, sweet potato. In these plants, the excessive food are stored in the root portion. In some cases, the roots become green and they can also take part in the photosynthesis process. Trapa, orchids, these are the examples. Roots in some plants, they are also helpful in exchange of gaseous respiration process. These are the examples, Rhizophora, Sonaceae. In parasitic plants like Cuscuta, in adventitious roots, they penetrate the host stem. So parasitic plants means they did not uh, uh, make their own food. They are not able to do photosynthesis. So for food, they have to depend uh, on some other plant bodies, and they collect their food and water from that plant bodies with harming that particular plant bodies. So this plant body is harming another plant body, and in cost of harming another plant body, this plant body is benefited. So these are the parasitic plants uh, which make their root in such a way that they can penetrate in other plant bodies, and from that they can collect or they can obtain their food and water. Sometimes roots also take part in vegetative reproduction process also. So this is asexual reproduction, one type of asexual reproduction in which the roots can also take part. Example is sweet potato. Sometimes aerial roots, they absorb moistures from the air, and thus modified roots from different functions. These are the mostly the plants which we found near the saline marine water conditions. The mangrove trees, they have some aerial roots to absorb moisture from the atmosphere for photosynthesis process. Because they cannot uh, collect the saline water from the subsurface pores, and that is not useful in the photosynthesis process. So to run the photosynthesis process, the root becomes aerially exposed and they collect moisture from the atmosphere. So these are the modifications or modified versions of roots, and apart from anchorage and supply or collect water and minerals from the soil, they can do some additional functions also. Now, if we look at the root system is consists usually a main root that is much thicker and It is the central axis which is descending in the subsoil in the underground portion, and from this main root we can see some branches emerging. These are often called the branching root or secondary root. This branching root can be again branched. In that case, those are called tertiary root. At the terminal end of the root, there we found a protection or a cap-like structure which is called root cap. This root cap basically helps during penetration within the hard soil or within the hard substrate. So as the this is the growing direction, the tip of the root underground, that is the growing direction. So that is very soft, and during penetration in the subsurface rocks, in the subsurface soil, the tip may be damaged. So to protect this tip, a root cap is there for protection during penetration, or during protection from penetration in the subsurface soil or subsurface rock. Above this root cap, there are some clusters of very fine hairs which are called root hairs, and these are the organs which basically absorbs water and nutrients from soil, and after that they will transfer these amounts to the cooking area of plant, that is to the leaves. Now there are different, the first type is the tap root. In this type, there is one main root, and from this main root, the secondary and tertiary root grows in different directions. The second type is the fibrous root. In the fibrous root, there is no main root, but instead of that, from the underground portion just below the stem, there are numerous equal shape, equal length, and equal diameter uh, small fibrous roots having equal length and equal diameter. They emerge in the, or they grow in the subsurface portion. So instead of a main root, there are numerous roots having same diameter, same length. And the last type is the adventitious root, and this type of roots develops from any other organ of the shoot systems. So often we found from the stems, often we found roots from the leaves, and these are called the adventitious roots, and these are used for different functions. These are not particularly for the anchorage and collection of nutrient rich water from the subsurface, but they are used for different functions. Now plants, they have their different roots, or they have their different morphologies, or they have their different shape and size of the roots, that mainly based on the relation of available water. So depending on the water relation of plants, plants are divided into four types. The first is known as the hydrophytes. These are the plants that grow only in water. So these are strictly aquatic plants. It always remain in a aquatic condition, and they are often permanently submerged, permanently drowned in water. The famous example is lotus, water lily. The second type is mesophytes, where the plants thrives on a moderate supply of water. That means water supply from the subsurface is not very good, it is moderate. The famous example is oxydaisy. Third type is xerophytes. These are the plants that thrive under conditions where the available soil water is very negligible or very small in amount. These are the cactus, what we found in the arid regions. The supply of water is very, very uh, less. And lastly, the halophytes. These are the plants which occurs in the salty marshland areas where there is, the soil is mostly saline, mostly rich in salt. So because of the high concentration of salts, the roots becomes mostly aerial. The mangrove trees are the best examples. If you look at the scientific name, the best example is Rhizophora. So these are the Halophites plants. After the root system, if we look at the portion of the plant above the surface, that is the shoot system. Uh, that is the aerial part of the plant body, and this shoot system is uh, shoot system. One type in which the shoot system bears only the branches, that is called vegetative shoot, and in the other type, when the portion of the shoot system bears the flowers and fruits, that is the reproductive organs, reproductive parts of the plants, that shoot portion or that portion of the shoot is known as reproductive shoot. So in one portion it bears only the leaf or the branches, that is the vegetative shoot. The in other cases or in other portions, it bears the fruits and flowers, that is the reproductive shoot. So here in this picture you can see these are the vegetative shoots, and in this portion you can see it bears the flowers, so it is the reproductive shoot. So a same tree have both vegetative shoot and reproductive shoot. Now the main organ of the shoot system is the stem, which is the main axis of the shoot system. If you look at the characteristics of the stem, it is the ascending portion of the shoot system or the ascending axis of the plant. It is always positively phototropic, that means grows in the direction of light, negatively geotropic and negatively hydrotropic, that means grows opposite to the direction of the gravitational force as well as the source of water. It has many internodes and nodes. From nodes are the places from where branching occurs, and there are internodes also. The stem also have multicellular hairs. The stem bears flowers and fruits, and you can see often these kinds of pictures when a tree planted in a tub is aligned in a horizontal way, that is they are somehow dislodged from their original position, and according to the source of light and source of uh, water, the shoot part and the root part, they are bent after the disorientation of this tub. Now the function of stem is mainly it carries water and nutrients from the root to the different parts of the plants. It produces support to the lateral appendages, to the branches, leaves, flowers, and fruits. And lastly, stem sometimes get modified to perform some additional functions, such as it may be performed for storage house of the plant, where the excessive food is housed, or storage of water. Uh, Even in some plants, the stem part is modified and it bears the chlorophylls so that it can take part in the photosynthesis processes. Now coming to the stem morphology, a stem have nodes, that is the points from where the branches developed. These are the points you can see. From these points the branching occurs. So these are the nodes within the shoot system or within the stem, and the portion between two successive nodes, this portion is called the internode. Similarly, in this area, this is the node, this is another node, and this portion, the intermediate portion, or the in between portion between two successive nodes, is called the internode. And around the stem, the leaves or the branches occur in different pattern, and the arrangement of these different pattern of leaves and branches around the node or around the stem is known as phyllotaxy. Now coming to the leaf, that is the arrangement of leaves and branches around the stem. So there are mainly three basic types of arrangement found in the present day plants. The first is the alternate arrangement, where you can see that the branches of or the leaves of the plants, they are arranged in a alternate fashion. So every alternate node, the branches are or the leaves are oriented in opposite direction. This is known as alternate arrangement. The second type, where the two leaves at the same node, they are oriented or they are directed opposite to each other. This is known as opposite arrangement in this case. And the last type, where three or more leaves or more branches, they are they are surrounding a single node, such that in this case you can see four leaves or four branches, they are occurring from the same node and they are encircling the same node, and that is why they are known as hold type of phyllotaxy. Now, bud is another, um, it is an undeveloped or embryonic shoot, and it normally occurs in the axil of the leaf. Axil is these kinds of junction points uh, from a node or from the node from where a branching occurs. So here you can see these kinds of angulations occurs due to the emergence of these leaves or branch from a node, and this angular portion is known as the axil. And these kinds of undeveloped or embryonic shoots often occurs in these kinds of axil or in the growing portion, that is the tip of the stem. So when the buds occur in the growing portion or the tip of the stem, they are known as apical bud, or often it is known as terminal bud. And when the buds occur in the axils, they are known as the axillary bud, or often it is known as the lateral bud. So depending on their occurrence, they are known with two different names: terminal bud and axillary bud. Now, based on nature of the stem, the plants are divided into three groups. The first group is known as herbs, where the stem is soft, juicy, like this type. One famous example, what we commonly found in our uh, home, is the tulsi tree, where the stem part is soft and lots of um, juicy materials is there, lots of watery material is there. The second type is known as shrubs, where the stem is of medium sized and numerous woody stems are there. So instead of a main stem, there are numerous equal uh, shaped and equal diameter branches coming out from the uh, portion from the aerial portions of the shoot systems, and all these branches have equal shape and sizes, but keep in mind they does not have a main stem, these kinds of. So instead of a main stem, there are lots of branches which have equal diameter and equal strength. They are relatively much harder or much rigid compared to herbs. And the last type, which is known as trees, these are the large plants with thick woody stems, and they have a proper stem, that is the main stem from which the branches occurs. So these are the three types of plants depending on the uh, different characters of stem. Now, the stem exhibit a variety of branching patterns to get enough sunlight. The main purpose of stem is to make available ample amount of sunlight to the leaf areas where the photosynthesis process is occurring. So depending on that, the leaf or the plant have different types of branching pattern. The first type is known as the dichotomous branching, where the growth of plants is mainly occurring from the apical bud, that is the terminal bud occur in the growing tip of the plant, and this apical bud bifurcates or splits, giving rise to again to apical branches, and at the tip of those branches again some buds occur. So every time the branching or the splitting or the growing of the plant occurs with the help of those apical buds, that means the tip bud of the growing direction of the plants. The second type of branching is known as the lateral or axillary branching. As the name suggests, that this type of branching occurs mainly from the axillary buds. So instead of apical buds, branching mainly occurs from lateral sides, from the lateral buds of the main stem. And we know that lateral buds are also occurs in the axillary axils, and they are also known as axillary buds. So any kinds of branching from these axillary buds are known as axillary branching. Now these axillary branching are of again two types. The first one is the racemose, where the apical bud of the plant grows indefinitely. So the main stem apical bud, this apical bud, this single one grows indefinitely but without any kind of branching, without any kind of splitting, and it gives rise to a straight stem axis of very large length on which the lateral buds grow. So this apical bud grows indefinitely, by which the trees got a much higher length, and from the axillary buds they will grow and form different branches at different portions of the stem. The second type of axillary branching is known as cymose, where the apical buds gets lost or die. So every time here you can see this one is the apical bud, it lost or die. So the vertical growth is restricted or ends here, but apical bud grows from these axils. So they will grow again. This apical bud grow and sorry, again this axillary bud grow, and at the tip of this axillary bud, after growing, the apical bud forms that will also die or end. So every time the apical bud forms from the branching portions or from the main stem, that will die out, and always growth occurs from the axillary bud. So you can see the apical bud dies or ends, axillary bud grows. Again the apical bud dies, axillary bud grows. Again the apical bud dies, axillary bud grows. So every time apical bud die or end, and growth occurs from the axillary portions. Okay, so that's all about the stem systems and stem morphology. We'll continue the shoot system in the next class.